And welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with you, along with Zach Malamud. Zach, a 1 week hiatus. We took our bye week early, but we're back at it again. Week 4, ready to go. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling real energized now, Brett. Everybody needs a bye week once in a while. It's all good. But we're back for week 4. Excited to talk about a lot of stuff that went on in the past week or so and looking ahead to this week.
Yep. So wherever you are, please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us the thumbs up. Make sure you check out some of our previous episodes. And we obviously did a lot of division previews, and some of those went very well and are very accurate. And a couple of them, obviously, as it goes, we have some bumps in the road and some surprises here. We got to get to what we missed last week and coming into this week. The biggest thing, I think, takeaway dynasty-wise and redraft-wise, Bryce Young, he was benched in favor of Andy Dalton, the former number 1 overall pick. And then also this week comes out Adam Thielen to the IR. Zach, let's start with the Bryce Young news and just the overall impact for him. Now, it's been pretty well documented. Dave Canales basically saying, this isn't the end for him, and we just need to give him a break. And then it comes out, that they might go back to him later in the season. Obviously, we saw what happened in week 3. Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle, comes out firing. Deontay Johnson looks totally energized, looks like a completely different player. And right now, obviously, it's only been a week, but if it continues at this pace and they go and they shock a Raiders team like that and they kind of get themselves going, I think that, we might not see Bryce Young so quickly.
Yeah, Brett, and we can go on and on about how Carolina has kind of dealt with this situation overall, Bryce Young, and even how when they drafted him, just kind of what the situation was for him in Carolina. And yes, they added weapons this year and certain things like that. You can talk about how he only played, I think it was 6 snaps or something in preseason, maybe 1 game or whatever, just 1 drive that he was really allowed to really get out there and get used to his players. We could go all day on that, but just simply from the dynasty perspective, of course, it's if you're a Bryce Young owner, it's kind of painful to watch this because you pretty much think that you wasted a high draft pick in a rookie draft to get Bryce Young. In the end, this is definitely not the last time we're going to see Bryce Young. It could be maybe potentially, Brett, the last time we see him in Carolina, because although Carolina's sitting there and saying, oh, well, it's not the last time we're going to see him, it's okay. The longer you keep a first-round pick sitting there and trying to help him learn, the longer it takes, the days go by in the guy's career. So he can get frustrated. He seems like he kind of understands why he was benched in the end. Yeah, of course. He did not play well. It's as simple as that. For the first 2 weeks of the season, he did not play well. The offense wasn't built well enough for him, and just the situation overall was not good. They made a change. They got a big win, a pretty shocking win, if you'd say, in Las Vegas, where they absolutely dominated that game from start to finish, and Andy Dalton comes in. So for Carolina, yes, you kind of change what you're looking for right now, putting Andy Dalton in. But for Bryce Young, you got to sit there as a dynasty owner. Don't trade him because, that this is the worst possible value you're going to get for a guy like Bryce Young. There will be times where he will be able to come back. So I wouldn't panic just yet if you're an owner of him.
All right, we got to jump right to the next part of this, which is that Adam Thielen is now on IR. And that means he's going to miss the next 4 games. Obviously, we talk about, what happened, the immediate impact. I think it really speaks to what we saw last week with Deontay Johnson alive. I think this is an opportunity right now for Xavier Legette to actually get his feet wet in the league. Didn't make a huge impact. Obviously, he only caught 2 passes last week, 42 yards total. Now he sort of is going to have the opportunity to basically step into a larger role here. So how high are you looking at for Legette? Is he a viable fantasy option right now with him out, with Thielen out? Or are you sort of just playing the wait and see game here?
Yeah, I'm not really too high on Legette. I think this week, yeah, you can look at the matchup and how bad Cincinnati's defense was against Jaden Daniels and Washington last week. But as far as Legette, I would say it's kind of like there's multiple options there, Brent. I think Deontay Johnson gets a huge bulk of the targets. I wouldn't be surprised if he was like pushing a 35% target share this week. I think they're just going to pepper him with targets. After that, I yes, Legette's there. You also got a guy like Jonathan Mingo who's still hanging around and got 4 targets last week as well. I think that second guy is more going to be split more than anything. Whereas with Johnson, you got him at the top. He's definitely a starter this week. The other guys, I think you kind of pick and choose. They could be flex options, but I think a bit on the lower end, as I feel like there's better options on the board or better options available to put in your lineup.
I agree. I think that, again, Deontay Johnson is going to end up getting the targets. Should be noted that he did not practice today. And it is a notable thing, with the groin injury that he sort of was dealing with. I'm not sure if it's just some growing pains or whatnot. Obviously trying to get himself back into shape, and it's only, less than a month into the season. And so, not sure if that's what happened, but obviously to monitor, Deontay Johnson's status in the next couple of days, I think it's super important. But in the chance that he is full go and they take him off the injury report tomorrow, I think that he's a very high end wide receiver 2 option, and I think that there's a pretty good chance that he finds the end zone at some point.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I mean we'll get to this matchup in a little while. But if Johnson is for some reason out, I even still don't think that there's a wide receiver on Carolina that I'd specifically pick to be in my lineup. I think it's just you're kind of begging to put a guy in at that point. And although, yeah, the targets may be there, it's I think Chuba Hubbard would take up a lot of that workload.
Totally agree. Jumping right to our next piece of news here, Austin Ekeler ruled out with a concussion ahead of the Week 4 matchup with Arizona. So that means it's B-Rob time, I think. And obviously, right now he's running back 18, and that makes him, a lower-end running back 2. Austin Ekeler, I don't know, really challenged him that much, though, in the first couple weeks. Obviously, it sort of was like a 2-headed monster that they played, and Ekeler improved each week, but he didn't really, bite right into his workload. He did score a touchdown last week, which kind of saved his day. But each week we've sort of seen this improvement. And listen, I just think that the entire offense is starting to come together. We obviously saw it was like 90-something%. I think the number, 92% or something. Completion percentage from Jaden Daniels, like Terry McLaurin starting to come together. Luke McCaffrey looks like he'll be a pretty good player in this league. It all just sort of came together at once here for the Washington Commanders. And so, I think that obviously it's B-Rob time, and I think that it's full go in your lineup if you have him.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, he's in my lineup on the team that I have him. He's definitely my RB2 this week, and even though there's some guys that I had a decision, I'm like, there's no chance I can even think about putting B-Rob on the bench this week, especially without Ekeler there. So I think overall this looks for a lot of B-Rob. But also they're playing Arizona, who has a weaker secondary. So they could try and pass the ball a fair amount. I think this game is going to be like a little bit of a shootout because both offenses are high powered, but both defenses have struggled just a bit. So we'll also get into that one a little bit later. But as for Eckler, he was probably on your bench anyways, so probably not too worried about replacing him with somebody else in your lineup.
Yeah, certainly fair for that. I think that Eckler's probably a depth option for you, and so you're kind of just stash him on your IR spot if you got him. If you don't have an IR spot, then I still would stash him just because of the way that this offense sort of has come together, especially from the running game, which I think is pretty lethal. And they're trying to almost form that two-headed monster the way that you see that in places like Detroit. Let's jump right into our standouts last week. Got to start off with Saquon Barkley. Just an absolute animal. 17 carries, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had 4 catches in the air for only 9 yards. But 33.6 standard PPR fantasy points. Dude's a monster. He's just been on an absolute tear. Looks like he's going to end up being one of those, league winners by the end of the day. Obviously, we've seen the way that they've sort of used the tush push, and they've sort of strayed away from it a bit more this year than they did. Obviously, Jason Kelce not there. We saw a fake tush push that didn't actually work, but they pitched it out to Saquon. But it just looks like Saquon is essentially getting the workload he got for the Giants, but it looks like he has better blocking.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Saquon this year, this is kind of what we expected. Obviously not the insane output that he's had, but the ability for them to just rely on Saquon, give him the ball. All right, let's go. And then gives their offense a completely different kind of dimension. Something that they haven't really truly had in years past. Yes, Swift looked great last year, but like this is just a different animal. When you have somebody as talented as Saquon Barkley behind or next to Jalen Hurts, it definitely makes it, I feel like, a little bit easier for Philly on offense so far this year. But I mean, for Saquon, it's crazy to look at these stats against a New Orleans defense that we said through 2 weeks looked pretty darn good. And Saquon made them kind of look a little silly. Yes, there was that long play, so it boosted the stats a little bit. But even so, like, this guy was able to put up that many yards on New Orleans' defense, which a lot of people have put near the top of the league. So I think looking at it right now, Saquon, real top option, of course. He's really top 2, I would say, on the board, maybe even top 1. He may be by himself in a tier in the running backs right now, obviously with a lot of other injuries going on to some of those top players.
Yeah, it's fair. I think that, obviously more on the horizon, and we talk AJ Brown, and, we'll talk about that sort of impact of him looking like he's not going to be there. Devonta also looks like he might not be playing for them this weekend. So I think it's just going to basically be the Saquon show. Buccaneers defense, 137.7 yards allowed on the ground per game. That's 24th in the league. Also, 6 rushing scores allowed. That is the worst mark in the entire league. And so, healthy dose of Saquon coming this week as well. And obviously, you're starting him. But, I think the expectation has to be a bit higher, especially riding the hot hand that he is without the guys around him.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, so jumping to our next standout here, it's Derrick Henry. Listen, I think King Henry, it's the tale of 2 cities for him. And it really just comes down to, are they winning or are they losing? Because it looks like when they're down, he's not a huge part of the offense. We saw that week 1, Kansas City didn't really have a huge impact. 46 yards, he had a goal line carry for the touchdown at the beginning of the game. But didn't really seem to make an impact. The second that they go up on Vegas, like, he's up there running. Dallas, they basically were like, okay, let's make sure they don't get the ball. Let's just keep running it with Derrick Henry. 25 carries, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also caught a ball for 23 yards, which was a nice play. finishes with 30.4 standard PPR points. So yeah, I think it's just tale of two. Obviously, you're putting him in your lineup every week, but I think it sort of made me a little bit tempered on my expectations, seeing how they utilized him week 1 versus half of week 2, and then obviously in week 3 when they were up.
Yeah, so Brett, I mean, yeah, there's some things to worry about in terms of that. But if we look at the Ravens as a team overall, I mean, they're one of the top teams in the NFL, clearly. And although it was a rough start, an 0-2 start, and yes, they're only sitting at 1-2 right now. I think there's better weeks ahead. They may not be right away, as obviously 2 tough matchups now, Buffalo as well as Cincinnati on the road. But I mean, after that, you're looking at a bunch of defenses that, I mean, Derrick Henry can take advantage of. I mean, Commanders, Buccaneers, Broncos are 3 of them in the next couple of weeks after they take on the Bills and the Bengals. So, and even with those games, you can sit there and be like, well, all right, they don't look as great right now, the Ravens, and maybe be losing those games, but there's also a fair chance that they could be winning those games at some stages. The Bengals have looked god awful so far this season, and the Bills, it's at home. So I mean, if Baltimore takes this game from the beginning, that Derrick Henry is going to get the ball if they're winning. So I think when you look at it, yes, there's the 2 sides of it, and obviously they're not going to get him crazy involved in the passing game. That's not what he's there for. He's there for the running game and to grab yards that way. But you had a game like last week against Dallas where, although Dallas is a solid roster and a solid team, their run defense is woeful. So he's going to have those games where he puts up good numbers. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Yes, it's something to keep an eye on, but he's too good to make him even like close to a matchup dependent.
Yeah, I agree. I just think like it has to do with game script. It's very hard to figure out what the game script's gonna end up being, and so that's why I say you gotta essentially temper your expectations. But you're putting him in there. He's like a very high end running back 2, if not a low end running back 1. Happy I was able to get him back end of the second round, I believe it was, and a lot of people, that's sort of where they got him, and so yeah, he's still basically hold that value, and you'll have a couple weeks there where it won't factor in if the Baltimore Ravens go down in a game, but for the most part, like I think that the healthy dose of Derrick Henry will be there as long as they're winning.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so our last standout here, probably the biggest standout here, is Jauan Jennings, who finished with 46.5 standard PPR points, 11 catches on 12 targets for 175 yards, 3 touchdowns on the day. I mean, unbelievable performance. Zach, we talked about it over the weekend, obviously. It's just insane. It was pretty nice to see what he did, and it very well could continue this week. Obviously, we have Debo out. Brandon Aiyuk, tough matchup, like the potential that he gets shadowed, and they kind of have to just keep going to this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one for me, Brett, because while I'm thrilled that Jauan Jennings is putting up these kind of numbers, I am a little bit worried for a lot of the guys on San Francisco, whether that's George Kittle's out and Deebo Samuel's out. But I mean, Brandon Aiyuk is healthy, and Brandon Aiyuk got that big deal, and Brandon Aiyuk is the number 1 target, a lot of people say. But Jauan Jennings is putting up 50 fantasy points, right? So like it's a little bit strange in my mind that San Francisco, although they ended up being comfortable in that game, they ended up losing it in the end. And Brandon Aiyuk, yes, he got double-digit targets, but they didn't do anything with it. They gave the ball to Jauan Jennings most of the game. And while it's great for Jauan Jennings and it's going to continue, I am very worried if I am a Brandon Ayuk owner, because when is the time going to come? Everybody is out right now for San Francisco. And now he goes into a matchup this week. Hopefully he proves me wrong this week, Brandon Ayuk. He's going up against New England, who, yes, the defense has been tougher and things like that. But, I mean, the Jets as well as the Seahawks made it look pretty easy. DK Metcalf went to town on that defense a couple of weeks ago. So if this is not the week for Brandon Ayuk, when's the week? I mean, everybody's out. So while you have Juwan Jennings, keep putting him in your lineup. Great flex play, because for some reason San Francisco's sitting there and continues to throw him the ball over Ayuk. But it works for Jennings fantasy owners.
Was added in 53% of leagues just this week in ESPN leagues. He's now owned in 77.7% of leagues. Shout out to the 23% that still have him out there, 22% that still have him out there and haven't grabbed him. Not sure if it's a format thing or whatnot, but yeah, Juwan Jennings still out there. I'm going to say go grab him for this week because I think it could be a big week, and I'll talk about him a little bit later.
Yes, definitely agree.
So let's jump into the matchups. Zach, we start out with what has to be this very anticipated matchup in the state of New York and New Jersey, actually. That is the Dallas Cowboys against the New York Giants tonight, taking place in less than an hour from now. Daniel Jones has been really good these last couple weeks here. 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, 104.7 on the passer rating, 0 interceptions, which I think is also a very notable thing. Malik Neighbors looks like he's getting better. Obviously, like you're putting him in your lineup every week. But I just think like this ship has been set a bit here. I'm almost comfortable saying that Daniel Jones is maybe even a super flex play here, potential, low end, but a super flex play nonetheless. That said, listen, Singletary's he's in my lineup this week. I would say I'm not sure that I'd put anybody else there. Like we talked Wan'Dale, and like it's a great stash. And, a guy like a Theo Johnson, same thing, good stash. I'm not as comfortable playing those guys. And so obviously Neighbors is there, Singletary's in there, potentially Daniel Jones in there, but kind of just stashing those other 2 guys.
Yeah, I mean, I can put Wan'Dale a little bit higher as a sort of flex play, but a low-end flex play because, Dallas's defense has been god-awful, Brett. And although we sit here in the state of New York and say, oh, well, maybe they can put it together, they've looked really bad. Although they're going up against the Giants, we usually say they've looked bad. So I think the Giants have some avenues that they can kind of take advantage of this time, where it could be really like the perfect time for the Giants to take on the Cowboys in our recent memory, just based on how bad Dallas has looked in the first 3 weeks and especially the last 2. I think when you look at it, though, yeah, it's going to be mainly Singletary and Neighbors who are going to get the targets, going to get the touches. I think that if you're the Giants, I don't know how you don't give Devin Singletary like 25 rushes tonight with how bad Dallas's run defense has looked the last couple of weeks. Over almost 400 yards, I think it was combined in the last 2 weeks they let up on the ground. So, Singletary is going to get a big workload tonight, I would say, as well as Neighbors getting the targets. On the other side for Dallas, it's kind of interesting, but it's usually it's pretty much the same guys as usual. I would start Dak this week because of how weak the Giants secondary is. It's just it's hard to watch the defensive line versus the secondary. I feel like the secondary just kind of lets the defensive line down for the Giants when they get any chance to do so. And as well as CeeDee Lamb, you're putting in your lineup, and Jake Ferguson as well. Both good options. I don't really trust any of the running backs because it's a split mainly between Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott. So those 3 guys apiece for both teams in this one, Brett.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just think like there's a couple other names that I just sort of have my eye on. Jalen Tolbert, I think honestly, for me this week could be a potential guy. Was a candidate for ones to watch. As a potential guy, he's owned in only 6% of leagues, and so a potential deep league stash right now. Brandon Cooks has looked okay, but I feel like the Cowboys just need to spread the ball around a little bit more. It didn't exactly work so far for CD. They're kind of just trying to pepper him with targets, and he's been good, but obviously it has to be more than just him for them to win games. And Jerry isn't exactly very patient as far as that goes. So I'm starting CD. I'm starting Jake Ferguson. I am starting Dak. I agree with you on that front. Dowdle for me is more of a low end running back 2, if not a running back 3 flex, that sort of range. Totally dropping Zeke now. I think Zeke becomes on the drop list and Dowdle's sort of outplayed him. So I'm not really a fan of Zeke right now. And then, yeah, as I said, like Tolbert and Cooks, like I think Tolbert right now has the edge for me over Brandon Cooks. And, Cooks will get his. But I think that Tolbert right now, if I had to pick between the two of them, I'd rather have him.
Yeah, it's fair. Good guy to keep an eye on.
All right, so jumping right to the next game here, let's go through the Sunday slate. Atlanta, they host New Orleans in what is a pretty great matchup, I would say. In the last couple of years, it's been kind of doom and gloom for both of these teams, and now it seems to be something that's coming back. Obviously, New Orleans riding pretty high, and they look very good. Atlanta also looks very good. Which team you want to start with, Zach?
Atlanta, I love myself some Bijan.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, yeah, I'll get into it. I'm for Atlanta mainly. It's Bijan and London, of course, lineup locks this week. And other than that, yeah, Pitts is in the lineup as well. I'm keeping an eye on a guy in Darnell Mooney, Brett, because I feel like he is one of those players that in the first couple of weeks you said, all right, yeah, they're giving him a little bit of opportunity, and he's not really on the fantasy radar. Now I think he is, Brett. I think he's joined the fantasy radar because he's a number 2 option. He's the clear number 2 option at wide receiver, and he's gotten a lot of targets. He's gotten big time targets. We saw the game a couple weeks ago against Philly where, I mean, that last drive, 2 big targets to Darnell Mooney. So it's somebody that Kirk Cousins trusts right now, and he's a very solid player that, his career just wasn't great when he was in Chicago, and now he's in a better system, better place in Atlanta, and he's looked really, really good so far this season. I think he's definitely on the flex radar. If you're dealing with somebody that's going down with an injury right now, perfect flex play is a guy in Darnell Mooney. But those 4 guys mainly for Atlanta, Brett. That's what I'm thinking for this week.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, Kirk is a super flex, and I'm kind of closing it a little bit on Kirk Cousins until we start to see it a little bit more. We're starting to, but I'm not comfortable starting him as my regular quarterback. He's a good super flex option, nonetheless. Always the guy who flies under the radar, I feel like, every year. Bijan, you're starting. Drake London, you're starting. You're starting. And then, yeah, I think Mooney becomes a pretty good option here. More likely he's whatever, wide receiver 3 if you have a 3 wide receiver league, or a flex option. But, yeah, he looks good. And it's not like they're feeding him just balls way downfield like he was sort of used over in Chicago. They're kind of getting him into open space. They're doing some screen passes, and he looks good with this more well-rounded role that he has here. And he's obviously like wide receiver 2 now, and so I think that's a pretty good deal for him as well.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, some Drake London owners would get like a little bit worried about a guy like Darnell Mooney. I wouldn't. I think if you've seen this offense, they're really spreading the ball around, but also prioritizing those top weapons. Bijan as well as Drake London are getting those bulk of the targets and the important kind of targets. And they're always looking for them. So I wouldn't be too worried if I'm an owner of any of those guys.
Yeah, fair. Listen, I own Drake London, and at first I was like, okay, here we go. Is this going to be one of those, he's eating into the workload kind of a thing? But no, I think that once they get down to the red zone, we've seen a lot of the targets go to Drake London. We've seen the touchdowns go to Drake London as well. Bijan's still getting his workload as well. Kyle is starting to come around, and we saw him like wide open on that touchdown a couple weeks ago. So yeah, I think that this is sort of what the Atlanta Falcons wanted, as far as spreading the ball around, having a abundance of weapons for Kirk Cousins. So they sort of have that. On the other side of the ball, I mean, this is Alvin Kamara's show here, and obviously he becomes a start each and every week now, basically. And obviously you're starting Olave in your lineup. Rashid Shaheed, I think, becomes a pretty good start as well. Derek Carr for me is still a super flex. He hasn't really broken that glass ceiling. I can't trust him. I'm sorry. I'm just waiting for the floor to fall out from underneath him. It has to go off. It has to go off. Obviously last week was, very telling. He played against the Eagles and it just was not great. Finished as quarterback 25. So for me, I'm just staying away from Carr overall.
Yeah, and just quickly, Brett, on Shaheed, because I mean, we see this every year. There's the guy that's kind of takes a deep shot and is going off, and Rashid Shaheed is a perfect player for that. But you also see the downside of that. Whereas everybody said, oh, wow, Rashid Shaheed's playing really well. All right, I got to put him in my lineup last week. Sure enough, 0 for 5, on 0 receptions, 5 targets, nothing. I mean, that a goose egg. So we see it every year. I mean, Mike Williams was a big guy from a couple of years ago that was kind of the same when he was in LA. Like, that's what it is. That's the boomer bust that we're talking about. So you have to be smart about it. You can't end up benching a real consistent player for a guy like Rashid Shaheed. It's good enough sometimes on like a bye week and you kind of see it, but you also now see the downside of it's boomer bust. Like, that's truly boomer bust. And that's kind of the definition of Shaheed this year, Brett.
Yeah, it's like Gabe Davis is the guy that I just always go to. He's become the poster boy for that specific role for me. So yeah, I'm starting to be a little bit cautious. But yeah, he's still a flex option for me. Let's jump right to the next matchup here. Pittsburgh at Indianapolis, battle between Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson. Zach, last week was a week to forget for Anthony Richardson. Are you still starting it in your lineup?
I think so. Because there's the tight one there, because I mean, it depends on your backup. It depends who you have. I mean, we can go through the names of players who you would start over them this week. I mean, there's guys up there that you'd say, all right, whether it's a Brock Purdy, a Joe Burrow, a Justin Fields, a Baker Mayfield's a conversation. Like we're in that range right now of this matchup is god awful, Brett, because the Pittsburgh defense is really, really good. Plus the fact that Anthony Richardson has not looked that great so far through 3 weeks. That just the reality, and people continue to believe in him. They should right now. However, if you have a better option, start them, because this matchup is pretty bad. Like I said, I think you got to just pick and choose based on who your backup is, or if you grabbed Richardson and you double dipped on a QB1, like, there you go. There's your answer right there. So important stuff there. And I think it just kind of tells the story of the matchup this week. You're still, of course, starting a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who's at the top of the running back board. But then you look at wide receiver. Pittman has not looked good so far this season. You're still going to end up putting him in your lineup. I think probably as like a wide receiver 3. But I am not confident. I traded Michael Pittman actually in a league last week. I traded him for Tank Dell just because I was done with him. I thought there was just a better option elsewhere. I like the upside of a guy like Dell. So although he may not play this week, like there's just different avenues. But Michael Pittman has not looked good. So I don't know how you have a ton of confidence to put him in your lineup, but he's still sitting there, like I said, as a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also agree with the Jonathan Taylor one, like no brainer start. Richardson, for me, it's interesting because obviously we're in a dynasty league where he's my super flex starter. Like I'm starting over Daniel Jones as highly as I spoke about Daniel Jones a few minutes ago. He's still going to be my super flex guy. But we play in an ESPN league, Zach, where I picked him as my quarterback 1. And you're right, I doubled up on it because I was a little bit nervous about the rushing. So I went out, I got Brock Purdy as my backup. I'm starting Brock Purdy this week instead. And I mean, I wouldn't fault anybody who had that sort of decision, made the same sort of play, even if Anthony Richardson might have the higher ceiling. I also think the lower floor is there in this matchup. Really tough defense. They look like the best defense in the NFL. And so for me, yeah, I think he's probably, listen, he's a super flex option, but he's probably a very low end quarterback 1 this week. And it really comes down to what your team built like, because, we have a friend who has Anthony Richardson. He's going to start him each and every week and, power to him. But I think that, it really depends on if you have a really solid backup like Purdy, like I would play Purdy this week instead.
Yeah, 100%. On the other side, Fields is a starter this week against Indianapolis, whose defense, although they looked solid last week against Chicago, just kind of tells you where Chicago's offense is at as well. We'll get to them in a little bit. That Indy's defense is just bad. So you look at it, Fields is going to play, of course, and there's some news that came out that Jaylen Warren did not practice today, Brett. So I'm boosting Najee Harris. I'll talk about him later. But I think it could be a big workload for him this week if Warren is out against a weak defense, like I said. And of course, George Pickens is in your lineup. Freiermuth is also there based on injury. If you got a Ingram, a Kittle, a Laporta, Njoku, whatever it is, he could be one of those replacement guys to fill in for any of those injured tight ends, because we know tight ends right now, not an easy subject. So he's also on the radar, Brett.
Yeah, Indy not really good against tight ends this year, and obviously pretty small sample size with just 3 games under our belts. But, for me, Muth is a must start this week, and it comes down to that the entire tight end position has been very unreliable, and he's been one of those reliable guys. And so I'm starting him this week if I have him. Obviously, it depends on who you got there and who you're starting him over. But he's a tight end 1 for me this week. Pickens right into the lineup. Najee, I agree with you. I think there's going to be an uptick, especially if Warren isn't there. Like, this could be a really big output for him. And then Justin Fields, I think that the biggest quote from this week came from Justin Fields, who basically the Pittsburgh media backstory. The Pittsburgh media has been peppering Mike Tomlin to find out, is Justin Fields going to be named the quarterback 1? And they just basically disregard what he said a couple weeks ago with Russell Wilson. And essentially Mike Tomlin's response was, we don't need to name a quarterback 1. We're just going to week to week, and Justin Fields is going to be the guy this week, but we don't need to name one. And then, of course, they go and they press on onto Justin Fields the same sort of question, like, do you feel comfortable not being named the quarterback 1? And his response was pretty simple. Depth charts do not win games. And I totally love that answer. It just was an awesome answer, which is why I'm mentioning it. He, for me, is quarterback 1 this week. I'm playing him. I think that, he's got some solid value. Obviously, the legs still there. We've seen it. This could be a really big smash game from him in what could be, honestly, it could be a blowout for either team. But if not, it could be a pretty high-scoring game.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, so let's jump into our next matchup. A guy who I think could have been started over an Anthony Richardson this week is Sam Darnold, Zach. And obviously, tough matchup against Green Bay. But I think like we're starting to see the Sam Darnold that was drafted that the Jets didn't get. We saw him a little bit in Carolina. This is what I think happened. I think he went to a team that has good coaching and totally has righted the ship for him. Obviously, you got Justin Jefferson there. Pretty good solid weapon in Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler. But I really think it just comes down to he's got great coaching around him. And they've sort of settled his nerves a bit, and he looks like a pretty good quarterback.
Exactly. And I think the system has definitely helped him out. The coaches, like you said, have helped him really get comfortable in this offense, and it's a great offense for him. We also said that even during the offseason, we were like, all right, well, JJ's not going to start, and they're going to go with Darnold. This is a solid enough. You actually feel a lot better about Justin Jefferson if Sam Darnold was in at quarterback. That's what we were saying when they announced it, and sure enough, you're feeling great if you're a Justin Jefferson owner in the first 3 weeks. Sam Darnold's looked great. You obviously can see like in this offense, he's also without two of his top weapons in Hawkinson, who's still injured, and Jordan Addison hasn't been playing. I mean, it's not even a problem, Brett. He's got Johnny Munt there and Jalen Naylor and all of these options that he's going to. It's no problem. Of course, Aaron Jones in the back.
Quarterback 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous.
He is this year.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
So the system is perfect for him. And even though the top guys aren't there, he still looked really, really good. So, definitely a guy to put on the radar. You could say, it's a bit of a tougher matchup. He's on the road. He's in Green Bay. But it's not like winter time in Green Bay where he's playing in a snowstorm. It's still September. It's nice enough weather for Green Bay standards that could be a solid week. I am expecting a nice reunion here from Aaron Jones. I think it could be a big one, Brett. I'm not positive on it, but I feel like Aaron Jones could go like berserk in this game. It wouldn't shock me. Like just kind of prove the doubters wrong, and this is what you're missing out on, basically. Of course they all went their separate ways, but Aaron Jones is a top 10 running back heading into this week, Brett. What he was able to do last week and a couple weeks before that, he's looked great so far this season. The offensive line has held up. He's looked really good behind them, but he went up against a tough Houston front last week, made it look quite easy. Top 10 option this week. Anybody else, I would say, Jefferson and Addison is on the radar, but you got to keep an eye on the injury status. He's more of just a flex option, a low-end flex option. I don't think he'll be 100% healthy when he gets back into the game if he does play. So I'd limit expectations, but of course Jefferson, top of the board and at wide receiver.
They cut Aaron Jones, and I think that speaks volumes. And obviously, he was really frustrated when it happened. Signs with the rivals. I think that this is going to be one of those games where they just basically let him run free. And obviously, it's like his Lambeau return. I'm sure. Exactly. I think that this is the free Aaron Jones week. I think that he'll get the ovation at the beginning. They'll play a nice video for him and whatever, but then it's going to be all business for Aaron Jones. And I think that, especially if they are leading, they're going to give Aaron Jones the ball as much as they possibly can. Big story, though, is what's happening on the other side of the ball. As far as what the quarterback situation is, just, sidebar, yes, it depends on Addison. Just quickly to finish off on the Vikings. Depends on what happens with Addison. Keeping my eye on Jalen Naylor, though, especially if Addison doesn't play, just as one of those stash guys. But like I said, Darnold, strong start. Obviously tougher matchup, so more of the low end quarterback one, but a guy I'm considering over over an Anthony Richardson right now, who sort of needs to right his own ship. Going to the other side of the ball, though, they're playing the game, I think, quite simply. And we've talked about, how many weeks he'll miss and will he come back? And then, they had him taking warm-ups last week. They're going to have the same exact thing. They're saying they're going to take it right up to game time. I think this is a game he might actually play. And I don't know how healthy he is. And that scares me a little bit. And so for me, I'm fading him this week. If you have Jordan Love and you're like rah, I think that you need to take your expectations a little bit. I'm not sure how much they're going to have him move around if he plays. It's almost like that game where we thought Aaron Rodgers was going to come back last year in the 20s and play against the Commanders. And, he talked all offseason about how he was going to play in a little circle. I think that that's sort of what we would see if Jordan Love is the quarterback. For me, it really just cements that Josh Jacobs will be a pretty big target. Jaden Reed, obviously, you're starting him as well. But, I think I would fade Christian Watson, actually. And I think I would fade Dobbs. I think that, Tucker Kraft's an interesting option. You probably have a better one at tight end. And so for me, it becomes a little bit murkier depending on who's at quarterback. Now, if Malik Willis is there, I'm fading Josh Jacobs a little bit more. Obviously, I'm not saying don't start Josh Jacobs. He's a must start for me. But I would say, obviously that rushing upside goes away a little more if you have Malik Willis in there than a unhealthy Jordan Love, because that's what he is. He's unhealthy. That said, Christian Watson still looks to start. I would say he probably is a flex option. Jaden Reed is definitely a start, depending on either quarterback. I don't know what I would say as far as the tight ends go. Malik Willis likes his tight ends more. And so, yes, maybe there's a slight tick in the option for Tucker Kraft. I still think I would probably pick a better option, though, at tight end. So, yeah, it really just depends on what's going on. As far as it goes, I think the only one where I'm like start versus sit is probably Christian Watson, depending on who's at quarterback. Otherwise, I'm starting my guys and I'm sitting those other guys.
Yeah, I'm a little bit different. I think if Love is in, it tells me that, he's going to be in because it's a big division game. I think that's the reason. Like if they were playing Denver at home, like he's not playing. I think it's kind of as simple as that. Although Denver has looked pretty good. Shout out to them. I think when you look at the Packers in general, though, it's like, all right, well, if Malik Willis is playing, Josh Jacobs, and that's pretty much it. I don't have the same confidence in a guy like Jaden Reed if Malik Willis plays, because it's just it's a different offense. I think there's better options also, like in terms of like flex plays, and there's guys that I'd rather have if Malik Willis is playing quarterback. It tells me also like Jaden Reed's not going to get the same amount of touches. We're also I brought up like facing Denver, like Minnesota's defense should not be doubted. They have 3 straight weeks absolutely dominated their opponents. Houston's offense, one of the best in the NFL, nothing. San Francisco's offense, one of the best in the NFL, nothing. They did play the Giants in week 1. That's the only one. But like the last 2, and I know they've been at home in Minnesota, it has been a masterclass from this defense. And Brian Flores has got that defense near the top of the league right now. So tougher matchup than usual. If it's Willis at quarterback, I'm going just Jacobs. That's it.
It's fair. Listen, I understand it. I think that, like you just said, like big divisional game, that's the only reason why I even factored in Jaden Reed, because I think that they're going to have to move the ball down the field, because I think Minnesota's defense can't be discounted. They are going to definitely try to hone in on stopping Josh Jacobs. That's the only reason why I factored in Jaden Reed, because somebody's going to have to catch the ball. And depending on who's playing quarterback, even if Malik Willis is in there, Jaden Reed's going to be the guy who they're targeting to catch those passes. And so that's the only reason I really put him in there. But yeah, big divisional game. So yeah, I honestly, knock on wood, I think that Jordan Love comes into the game because it's a big divisional game. I think the Packers get a good win here. But yeah, it's that small circle. Like turn around.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's jump into our next game here. Zach, it is not going well for the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. Trevor Lawrence looking like a complete shell of himself. Travis Etienne doesn't exactly look, much better. It's just, it's not good. Brian Thomas, I think right now looks like he can be a good player, but he really hasn't been able to piece it together. It's just not going well. Is the best player on the Jacksonville Jaguars right now Christian Kirk, or are they just really missing Evan Ingram? Like, what's the story here? I just think the whole team looks like a complete shell of what they were just even, the end of last year.
Yeah, I mean, bad matchups are one thing. Obviously, but there was a couple games they kept it close. The Cleveland game, they kept it close, but just couldn't work around that Cleveland defense. Miami, they were up the entire game, let it slip towards the end. Of course, Etienne's fumble. That's the main talking point from that game. And then last week, you just get trounced in Buffalo, which fair enough. A lot of teams do leave Buffalo pretty unhappy. They don't get trounced like that, but I think it's never easy to go into a game like that, especially when your confidence level is as low as Jacksonville's is right now. I mean, is anybody in a fantasy lineup except for Travis Etienne? Of course, we got to keep an eye on Evan Ingram and if he's healthy or not. But I think that's it. I understand Brian Thomas could be a flex play, but like this offense has looked bad, Brett. Looked bad. And now they're going on the road. Divisional matchup. Houston's coming off a big loss on the road where they got absolutely jumped. I think Houston comes in trying to prove a point here, and they're going up against Jacksonville, who can't do anything really on offense. So I think ETN is probably the only starter. And he hasn't looked glorious so far this season. I think that's it. Based on, like I said, the health of Evan Ingram, that would change my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only one I would potentially consider as a flex option, and no more than that, Christian Kirk, and it really just comes down to his target share and if Evan Ingram is playing or not. If Evan Ingram's not in there, like Christian had a 21.7% target share, they kind of realized, hey, he's pretty good. He can separate himself from the defender, and he did a very good job of that. I think that also him working out of the slot is a big deal. Houston's not good against guys in the slot, and so, I think that there's something to be said about Christian Kirk there. And obviously, listen, the temperature's getting a little bit hot right now on Trevor Lawrence. They got to settle it down a bit, and so I think they're going to try to get him a little more comfortable. That's who could potentially get him comfortable, and so he's a potential flex option for me. But yeah, I'm staying away from Trevor Lawrence this week. Travis Etienne's obviously in the line.
Yeah, makes sense. On the other side, of course, you're starting the main guys, and Stroud, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs. You're starting all three of those guys. They're all lineup locks. After that, Joe Mixon did not practice today. Hasn't practiced the last couple of days, so a bit of a warning sign for Mixon owners. I'm a Mixon owner. I picked up Cam Akers last week, and although it was not pretty last week, I think it'll be a fair amount better heading into this week. He'll get a lot of the touches. Pierce looks like he's also going to be out again. Obviously got to keep an eye on that, but it looks like Cam Akers is going to be the main guy if he's going to get most of the rushing touches if both of those guys are out, Mixon and Pierce once again. Other than that, I don't really see too much for a guy like Dalton Schultz. I don't think he's on the radar. I think maybe Houston's defense, Brett, if I bring it up. Houston's defense got a good matchup this week because might as well take a advantage on their home field against an offense that has definitely struggled so far this season. So one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely fair. Three on up front. Yeah, Pierce looks like he's going to be out. Tank Dell missed practice again today, and so he looks like he's going to be out. But the rest, start your guys, as we like to say. Let's jump right to the next matchup here. The LA Rams traveling to Chicago. Zach, it's kind of been like an okay fantasy start here for Caleb. He actually looked like a very decent quarterback last week. And so, does he become a potential option for you?
No, because I think their offense overall tells you about the game and how that went. They lost that one 21-16, and they were facing, I mentioned Indianapolis before, a horrible defense. Really, like one of the worst defenses in the NFL so far this year has been Indy. And although they looked great last week, great against the Chicago Bears offense, it kind of tells you where the Bears offense is. It's struggling right now. Not in a good spot. I would not be starting Caleb this week. I think, in super flex, of course, you're probably going to have to start him. He's going to be your number 2. But when you look at this matchup, you say, all right, it's a little bit better against this Rams defense that has struggled. But actually, the Rams defense, besides Jauan Jennings last week, looked pretty solid, I think, Brett. I mean, that's the only guy that really went off last week was Jennings. So in terms of the wide receivers, you'd say, all right, I'll put the wide receivers, DJ Moore, of course, along with Keenan Allen if he's playing as well. And then you also have Rome Odunze, who's on the radar as well. So I think like those 3 guys you're picking and choosing, it's more of Moore's in your lineup, and both Odunze and Allen are questionable right now. So based on injury, you're going to put them in. I think when you look at it, though, when is this Chicago offense really going to boom? I think this is the kind of week where they're at home, bad defense. Rams are coming off a real tough, gritty win against San Francisco. Could there be like a downside to that for Los Angeles and just come out and not play that well after last week? The injuries just keep piling up for them. So I think that may be my only positive sign for Chicago this week, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you're kind of just starting DJ Moore. Obviously, like wait and see on the other wides. Cole Kmet, you're starting him as well. But yeah, I agree on the Caleb Williams front. Like, I'm not ready to proclaim him yet the way that a lot of people did after last week. He's still a super flex option for me, but I don't know that I would start him in a regular fantasy league. DeAndre Swift still, kind of waiting, but also the panic bells are sort of ringing, and so. If you play in one of those leagues where, your flex option is mostly a wide receiver, like I'm sticking with the wides over DeAndre Swift. And yeah, I'm kind of panicking if I don't have any other options.
Yeah, I mean he's dropped into RB3 range, which I mean a lot of people drafted him in that kind of RB2 range. Like he's definitely like on the brink of start sit. Like he's right there. With how poor even last week was against that Indy front. I mean, he's averaging, I think, like 1.8 yards per carry so far this year, Brett. It's been awful. So I don't know how much longer you can sit there and trust a guy like Swift. On the other end, Kyren Williams. I think that's just the main one for me. They're on the road. They're in Chicago. I don't know if there's really any of the wide receivers that I'd specifically say, all right, go and start them. This offense runs through Kyren Williams. He's going to get like 26 touches or 27 touches, whatever it is, this week. And I think that's what you're kind of looking for. Colby Parkinson maybe on the tight end radar, just based on just so many injuries to the tight ends that we named already. I think that's it, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how you start anybody on them other than Kyron. Parkinson's. Listen, I've been starting Parkinson the last couple of weeks in our league just as a streaming option while I wait for Ingram to come back. Um, it's not exciting. He hasn't been any. There's been no excitement with putting him in, which is more of a lower end streaming option. But yeah, I'm kind of staying away from everybody on that offense. And yeah, there's some of those wide receivers that are kind of just like stashing just to have some depth just in case you need it. But I'm not excited by the Demarcus Robinson or Tutu Atwell the way that I was, like last year.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so let's jump right into Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles as they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Zach, let's start with the Eagles. It's kind of start your guys, and it really comes down to we don't know what the wides are going to be, and therefore kind of just start the rest of them. Hurts, Barkley, Goddard's got to go in there now. Listen, I'm considering, just full disclaimer here, Trey McBride dealing with the concussion symptoms. I'm considering putting Goddard in over McBride this week.
Yep, it completely fair. I mean, yeah, it's really start your guys for Philly and watch out for those injuries at wide receiver and nobody really behind them. Jahan Dotson not even like on the radar. They'll go with their main guys in Saquon and Goddard to get them over the line. On the other side for Tampa, it's pretty much the kind of the same. Baker's on the radar as a quarterback streamer this week, or even one of those quarterbacks that you could maybe start. It's a solid enough matchup against Philly, whose defense, yeah, they looked really good last week against New Orleans, but the secondary is still kind of a weak spot for the Eagles. And against this offense where, I mean, it's kind of full go sometimes when they have Baker Mayfield to Godwin and Evans, it could lead to a solid week. My one worry, it comes in the running back room, Brett, because I am a Rachaad White owner in a couple of leagues, and we're kind of at the point now where we're seeing the positives and the negatives of Rachaad White, and having somebody behind him like a Bucky Irving who comes in and can eat into those touches, but also make good use of those touches when it comes to the running game, which Rachaad White is not a master in. He's not a pure running back. He's more of a receiving type of back. So PPR, yeah, it's fine, and he's kind of on that flex radar right now. But Bucky Irving is pretty damn close. And there could be it could be a week or two before we start putting Bucky Irving over Rachaad White. So just something to keep an eye on. If you have better options than Rachaad White this week, like I do, then definitely consider just benching him for a week.
Yeah, the writing's kind of on the wall right now as far as Bucky Irving and his role in that offense. It just looks like he could at any point take over as the guy. It's kind of weird right now because when we talked about Rachaad White, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm pretty sure I said he'd be the steal of the entire draft based on where he was ranked. And that was kind of the outlook that we had on him. So I'll go on that one. But I think the panic bells are totally ringing. If you have a Rachaad White on your team right now, you're not happy. You're going out and you're trying to make some sort of trade to right the wrong, whether you're trading away White, but you're really kind of selling low. Instead, I'm probably looking to bring in another running back into that room. And in the case that White does have it, then you sort of have a three-headed monster per se. Yeah, for me, I think that Bucky Irving becomes a pretty good flex option this week, just because I think he's going to eat into that workload more and more. Baker, one of those guys I'm considering over Anthony Richardson this week. We talked earlier about that. Like Baker Mayfield might be a solid start. Yes, Philadelphia's defense is okay. Like they're a good defense. I still think that Baker has a good output. Godwin, Evans, you're starting them. Kate Otton's an interesting case for me as well. Just from the streaming side of things, I think like if you are sort of in that, we talk about how tough Philly is as far as the secondary and whatnot. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Kate Otten. It's sort of been that as the three-headed monster, not really Jalen McMillan as was sort of foreseen earlier this year. Kate Otten's been that third option. And so I think that he becomes a potential stream option there. McMillan, I'm not writing him off yet because he still has her old, but he hasn't gotten more than 3 targets in the game, and I think that's a little worrisome. And so I'm still stashing him on my bench, and I'm not worried about it from the dynasty perspective because he still looks good when he is getting the target. It's just the workload's not really there right now, and so sort of just stash him there.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Just want to note that they're doing the introductions right now for Thursday Night Football. And Malik Neighbors was the last man out of the locker room, sort of that honored guy, and it usually comes down to the quarterback position. Kind of crazy to see a rookie in what is a huge game get this, basically the last intro. That's kind of cool there. Let's jump right to the next game, though. 1 p.m. start, Cincinnati, Carolina. Zach, we just talked about them at the top of the show. Do you think that anybody is upgraded this week when playing Bengals, or are the Panthers guys sort of, just your two guys, or if not, just Deontay?
Yeah, I think it's just Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson that are on the radar right now. And even if Deontay gets ruled out, I still I don't believe a Leggett or a Mingo really even jumps up that high to put them in your lineup. I think Cincinnati's going to come into this game with a lot of motivation once again to prove the doubters wrong. Of course, last week we kind of said that as well. We were like, all right, well, this is kind of the time for the bounce back. Large favorites at home versus Washington, and they got trounced. So I think when you look at it, it could be a long day, especially if Deontay Johnson is not there for Andy Dalton. Of course, Adam Thielen already not there as well. So those two guys, and that's pretty much it for me, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you can't really start any of those guys, if you're in a super flex league. Like, I don't know that I even would start Andy Dalton. I think he's a lower end guy there. As far as the other side of the ball goes, yeah, you're starting your guys here. Burrow, Zach Moss, Chase Brown, flex option, I would say. As far as the receivers room goes, you're probably starting all 3 guys. I think that, Chase and Higgins obviously starts. I think Yosevas becomes a flex option this week. I think that this is one of those games that could end up being a complete blowout. I think that if that does happen, then they kind of pull Chase and Higgins out. We can see a lot of garbage time work from Yosevas. So that's sort of where I see it. Mike Gesicki also, I think, is a pretty good start this week. Potential streaming option if you have him out there in your league. I just think that the target share has sort of been there for him. He's been tight end 6 in the last 2 games. That's sort of notable as well. And so, yeah, I think that, a struggling defense per se, I think it's a good matchup for me here. So I'm going with Mike Gesicki here as a potential streaming option.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts, Brett.
All right, so let's jump right to the next one here. Denver has to take on Carolina. The matchup we've been waiting for a year and a few months here, as Aaron Rodgers finally gets to go toe-to-toe with Sean Payton. It got forgotten about, but we're bringing it back here. I think that, the words that were spoken about Nathaniel Hackett and that offense, now the Jets kind of got themselves rolling a bit. They're riding in to a game here at home against the Broncos. I don't think Aaron's going to be shaking any hands on the sideline with Sean Payton. This is going to be one where he kind of comes out and, again, tries to prove himself here. Could be a big day here for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, it could. I think it's an interesting one. Fantasy-wise, like, of course, you're still starting Garrett Wilson. I would a little bit minimize expectations because of the matchup. I mean, he's now in even some people's rankings dropped into the 20s, just based on we've seen Pat Surtain the last couple of weeks, Brett. I mean, every single matchup, it does not matter who it is, and they get locked down. So Garrett Wilson is unfortunately the guy this week. And yes, he still will put up some receptions, and they'll still try and kind of force feed him the ball. I would definitely minimize expectations just based on Surtain in that matchup. Not going to be an easy one for Wilson, but it puts other guys, Lazard, even Mike Williams, like some of those guys on a flex radar. I wouldn't really consider starting them. I think it's kind of just there's better options at as a flex play. But I mean, Breece Hall should have a huge day. Rodgers in Superflex, it's kind of a tricky one this week, based on this matchup, like I said. So Denver's secondary overall is a tough defense to go up against. He's still, of course, on the Superflex radar, Rodgers is, but another guy to kind of minimize expectations heading into this week. Those three guys are the main ones, clearly for me to just keep an eye on.
Yeah, for me, I think that, Rodgers, yes, super flex option there. Breece, you're starting, obviously, but I think Braylon Allen has a potential role here. I don't know if I would start him this week, though. I'm a little iffy on it. Probably a lower end super flex option. I think that what we've seen now out of the Jets backfield is that both of these guys are going to have a role. And I think that wasn't really seen back when it was like, okay, well, if Braylon Allen starts, getting some rushes, he's going to eat in the Breece's workload. It's not really working like that. And I really like that they've started to actually incorporate both guys out there at the same time in the split back sort of formation. That's sort of been fun because it's basically allowing both guys to flourish as far as fantasy options. So yeah, Braylon's probably a lower end flex option for me. But a consideration to be started this week. Garrett Wilson, listen, I think I'm still starting him. I think that, yes, Surtain has been really good. I think that, again, this is one of those motivation games for Rodgers, and I've never doubted him in any of those games. Going back to the Packer days, like when he was motivated to go out there and win the game, he'd do everything he can. And he won most of those. And so, yeah, I think Garrett will still have a pretty big day. They're going to try to find ways to get him open. He is a guy who has really good separation. And so I think that, there's sort of going to be an output there. Even if it comes to them doing some end arounds, things like that, they're going to try to figure out ways to get him the ball, screen passes, the likes. They're going to figure out a way to get Garrett Wilson the ball. Lazard, I think, is a pretty good option as well in the flex. We've just obviously talked about that it could be a tough matchup for Garrett Wilson. I think there's a pretty good insurance policy there with Lazard. And so, I have that. And then Conklin, I think Ty Conklin becomes a pretty good streaming option right now at tight end. So, I'm all aboard the Jets train right now. And I don't know if it's just the green colored glasses that I'm wearing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good starters here on this team. On the other side of the ball, it kind of goes the other way. I'm not really comfortable starting many of these guys like Sutton, who I think is their most reliable guy. He still becomes like a low-end flex option for me in what is a very tough matchup for him against this Jets secondary. It doesn't matter what side of the field he's on. The Jets like to play the sides rather than the matchups. Both sides are tough with whether he's going against Gardner or Reed. I think it's going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup for him. So low-end flex option for me. But, kind of a little hesitation in starting him. Javonte, you are starting him. I think we're starting to see the, bridge between him and McLaughlin now a bit more. It looked like it was a little bit murky last year, and it kind of just came down to Javonte's health. We're starting to see the gap there a bit more. So Javonte, I'm starting there. And that's it. I'm not confident. It's a tough matchup this week for them. You know, I don't know if I can start any of the rest of the Broncos.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm starting anybody, to be honest, Brett. I think
Yeah.
the matchup just kind of tells you it's going to be a long day. And you can either say, all right, based on the expectations of this game, it's either going to be a big blowout in favor of the Jets, or it's going to be like a 6-3 game. That's just kind of what we're looking at here. I think that's just kind of the reality of the situation heading into this week for Denver. It's just a tough defense on the road in New York, a Jets team that's feeling good right now. I don't know how confident I am in really any of these players this week.
Yeah, I think that for me, like Javonte, the only reason I say even Javonte is a flex option is because we've seen the Jets struggle at times. Obviously, we saw it with San Francisco. Like we've seen them struggle with the run. They're sort of middle of the road, and they kind of righted the ship a bit over the last 2 weeks to kind of put them into that 11th place as far as the running defense goes. But yeah, uninspiring flex option. I'll call Javonte this week, but yeah, I agree with you. It's tough to start anybody this week there.
Definitely.
All right, so as Danny Dimes takes the field after the Cowboys go 3-out here to start Thursday Night Football, we head over to Arizona as the Jaden Daniels Washington Commanders take on the Cardinals. Zach, let's first start with the Cardinals because I think it's sort of an interesting case here. You're probably just starting your guys, I would say. Trey McBride, though, might be out with a concussion. He hasn't practiced. Do you think there's any sort of uptick in anybody other than Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Nope. I think it's pretty simple in Arizona here. Start your guys of Kyler, James Conner, as well as Marvin Harrison Jr. And based on the Trey McBride situation, if he plays or not, that you'll start him as well. But other than that, I don't see anybody really in the conversation right now. Yes, it's a weak secondary, so you could think of a Michael Wilson or something like that, but I don't believe he really gets into the flex conversation too much.
Yeah, I think on the other side of the ball here, you can't really start anybody. Like you're starting B-Rob, starting McLaurin. Jaden Daniels, I think, becomes a start as well. So I can't say you're not starting anybody. As far as the receiver go, I would say after Terry, I'm not starting McCaffrey. I'm not starting Noah Brown. Zach Ertz, listen, he's been really good. I can't deny that. He's been really good. He's a potential streaming option. But for me, I don't know that I'm starting him this week. I don't know. The Cardinals have actually been good against tight end. It's the one thing that their defense is good at. And so for me, I don't know that I would start Zach Ertz. Terry, Robinson, Daniels. That's it.
Agreed. Those three. That's it.
All right, so let's jump to the next game here. San Francisco hosts New England. Zach, is this going to be a blowout or what?
It should be, but I mean, after that last week against the Rams, I don't know what to believe in terms of San Francisco. They really just continue to surprise me. Kyle Shanahan's offense and trying to really figure things out. I think it's of course for San Francisco, your main guys that aren't injured. If George Kittle is back, of course you're playing him. You also have Ayuk and Jawan Jennings is of course on the radar right now with Debo going to be out again, and Jordan Mason, of course, as well as Brock Purdy. So all your main guys in the lineup here, and even San Francisco defense, of course, one of the top in fantasy. Definitely starting them this week because New England's offense has not looked great. So I think that's pretty much it. Those guys on the San Francisco side, and I don't think anybody on the other side except for Ramondre, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not starting anybody on the other side of the ball. And as far as San Francisco goes, yeah, start your guys. Monitor the status of Kittle. He was limited yesterday. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, 100%.
Jump into the next game here. Cleveland at Las Vegas. Zach, it is just the whirlwind of emotions we've seen with Devontae. And listen, he's really good. He's obviously like a must start. I think that the patience level is starting to be tested a bit here, and we saw that last year as well. That said, I have no concerns with him. He's in my lineup. Brock Bowers in the lineup as well. I'm unsure about starting anybody else. Zamir White to me is a very low end flex option for me, and it really just comes down to matchup here.
Yeah, horrible matchup, really, against this Cleveland defense. And you could say that Malik Neighbors from last week and looking pretty solid against this Cleveland secondary, that gives you confidence in a guy like Devontae. So there's the positive there, but yeah, it's Devontae and Brock Bowers. I would not start Zamir White. I think it's a horrible matchup for him, and Madison has eaten into his load a little bit. Something we did not really expect coming into the year, especially in the running game, and the fact that Madison is getting like true goal line touches ahead of Zamir White too. It kind of tells you all you need to know right now.
Yeah, certainly fair. For the Browns, I'm starting Cooper, who looks really good now. Can't really start anyone else. Like Jerome Ford, I would say. You probably can start Jerome Ford this week. Not starting Jerry Jeudy, though.
Yeah, I think something to keep an eye on in Njoku, who's been, I think, limited at practice. It's kind of like it's an up in the air right now. Just continue to keep an eye on it as we get closer to Sunday.
Yeah, definitely a situation to monitor. Let's jump to the next one here. Kansas City at the LA Chargers. Zach, I think that, for me, it's become pretty clear who's the number one wide receiver for the Kansas City offense. And it's not Xavier Worthy.
It's not. It's Rashee Rice, my guy. I have him bred in 6 leagues. I have him in 5 of them. So I'm doing pretty well from that standpoint. I'm enjoying the Rashee Rice train. And if you haven't jumped on it, should try and jump on it, definitely. But I mean, he's like a top 5 wide receiver right now, Brett. Like right up there next to CeeDee Lamb. Like he's perfectly in that range, and I'd put him right next to him. So Rashee Rice, of course, is a lock for the foreseeable future. 100%. I look at it in the backfield. It's tough to even see this matchup and say, all right, well, there's a running back I want to start. Carson Steele, yes, it looks like he is the number one guy, but I just don't know how much I can trust it. Yes, they're going up against the Chargers, whose defenses have been good as well as bad. So, but I'm not as confident. Yeah, he's a flex option, but not too confident this week based on matchup. Other than that, yeah, Travis Kelce has looked awful to say the least. So you're still going to start him because he's Travis Kelce, unless you drafted a Brock Bowers or something as your backup and said, all right, I'm going to play him. That's really the only situation. But even in that, I don't know how you sit there and say, I'm going to bench Travis Kelce. That's I don't think we'd be saying that at this point this year, Brett. So I think Kansas City is going to make it a point for themselves to try and get Kelce the ball because they see the frustration. They see his frustration as well. It's just not the same right now. And they'll continue to try and get him involved, especially with Pacheco out now. It's a different offense. It definitely is. But other than that, those two guys really, of course, Mahomes as well at quarterback. That's about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for me, Carson Steele looked like he was the number one guy over Samaje Perine. And so for me, I'm at least looking at him. Not sure I would pull the trigger on actually starting him, though. And it really comes down to volume. Kind of just like we're not really sure. Also kind of curious if Kareem Hunt gets elevated at all and gets any sort of carries that would pull away from him. So I'm a little less confident as far as the run game goes. But, yeah, you're starting your guys otherwise as far as that goes. On the other side of the ball, Justin Herbert, listen, he looked better, but I don't know that I'm still confident in putting him in a lineup. Like, you're a Herbert owner. Are you starting him this week in Superflex at all or no?
Well, it's based on injury right now. I think that's the main thing. He's dealing with that aggravated ankle injury where he aggravated it from the week before. He aggravated it last week when he was playing in Pittsburgh. So they put in Taylor Heineke. This game really depends on if Justin Herbert plays. So that's going to really make any decision on if you're starting any of the players in LA. I would say that Dobbins is on the flex radar. Well, actually, he's in the RB2 range. I think, yeah, he's going to be one of the guys that's in your lineup. But if Herbert's not playing, I don't know how you sit there and say, all right, yeah, I'm confident in Ladd McConkey. Like, I just don't see it. Especially Kansas City's defense is a solid defense. And if they see that Herbert's out of the game, they're going to put a lot of pressure. That defensive line, Chris Jones leading the way. So it could be a long week if Herbert is out. If he's in, Dobbins, and you're also looking at a guy like McConkey.
Yeah, it's fair. I think that, that's sort of where I'm playing from as well. Not starting Quentin Johnston, get that he's like scored some touchdowns and stuff. Like, he's not on my radar right now. Right now it's kind of just J.K. Dobbins. Probably is the only guy I'd be starting on them. Obviously you also talk Josh Palmer, like curious if he actually plays and has some sort of role conversation that can be had about him being the one there over McConkey. He sort of just hasn't been healthy. But they pegged him as the number one heading into the season. And so curious to see what it looks like if he is healthy, what the workload is in a game like this.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so let's go to Sunday Night Football, Zach. We talked about it at the top of the show. Buffalo at Baltimore. Is Derrick Henry going to have this sort of workload that we think that he could have?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, it depends on how the game script's going. That's a big thing for Baltimore so far this season. You're, of course, starting him. You're also starting Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson as well. I know tight end's been murky. It's a weird one. You still got to just continue to work through it. It does move Mark Andrews a little bit further down the list of tight ends because he's just not getting the looks. So if you for some reason have Mark Andrews and somebody else that you'd probably rank ahead of him, then yeah, I'd consider one of those names. But other than that, again, another guy like a Brock Bowers, yeah, like that's the situation. But Andrews is not getting targets. It has not looked good so far. And also he's facing a tough matchup. This Buffalo defense has looked really good so far this season. And it's a murky one. So definitely just keep an eye on things in terms of Andrews this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can't get any worse for Andrews. And I think they're just really holding back on what his injury is. He doesn't look like himself. He's definitely hurt, definitely battling something. He just looks like a shell of himself. And so, yeah, curious to see if something comes out there, but they really haven't said very much. As far as the rest of it goes, you're starting Zay Flowers, you're starting Derrick Henry, Lamar obviously still in there. If Andrews can't go, I think he will be fine to go, but you never really know with these things. Like maybe you put a bump in Likely, but I'm kind of not riding with Likely right now. Even if Andrews isn't there, just because I'm sort of unsure of what the role is. And yeah, we saw a big output week 1. But that was just one game really. So I'm staying away from Isaiah Likely.
Yeah, makes sense. And on the other end, for Buffalo, just start your guys. Pretty simple on that one. I think, of course, Allen and James Cook, and at wide receiver, that's where the question comes in. Tight end, you're starting Kincaid, of course. Wide receiver, you kind of go a couple of different ways. I do think, Brett, that we're in a zone right now where Khalil Shakir is looking like the lead guy in the wide receiver room in Buffalo. So he is a flex option, especially in like deeper leagues, like a 12 team league. Like, yeah, he's a really actually solid flex option. Khalil Shakir is, just because he's getting those targets, he's making plays, he's got the touchdowns as well. Like he's a really solid player. So I'd continue to trust him. I know it's a bit of a tougher matchup this week against Baltimore, but even so, like Josh Allen's going to find Khalil Shakir. We even talked about that like before the season started. We said, all right, like who's going to be the top guy? Is it going to be somebody that he knows already and kind of trusts? So Khalil Shakir has proved us correct on that, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think like Khalil Shakir was one of those guys in Dynasty where he was sort of out there on waivers. And the consideration of picking him up, even when they had all those receivers, Davis, Stephon Diggs, like just because he looked very intriguing, very fast, can get open, separation was great. Like starting to see him come together to be a pretty good player. And yeah, Josh Allen sees that. He's become very familiar with him. He looks like the lead guy. So yeah, I think the flex option this week. I'm kind of looking forward to watching him sort of continue to grow and flourish in this offense here. And then yeah, start your guys. Kincaid, Allen, Cook. That's who you're starting there. But for me, yes, Shakir is now officially in the flex consideration.
Yep, agreed.
So let's finish off with Tennessee at Miami, the final game here, Monday, or I should say the second final game because we're in 2 Monday Night Football. I love that. It's so much fun to watch. We got the double box going on. YouTube TV, definitely recommend. I'm not sponsored by them, but go watch it on there with the double box. Titans versus Miami is the first game. So, Zach, let's start out with the Dolphins because I think it's a bigger question mark here. If Skylar Thompson is playing because he looks like he might be hurt, dealing with a chest issue, and there's potential that Tyler Huntley is the quarterback. We're not really sure. If Skylar Thompson is playing and not Huntley, are any of these wide receivers startable? And does that change if it goes to Huntley instead of Thompson?
I mean, I still think Tyreek is like the only one that I'd say, all right, like, yeah, it's going to be hard to like bench a guy like Tyreek Hill. Yes, it's under consideration. For example, I'll come up with one on the spot. Like if you drafted CeeDee Lamb with like DJ Moore and Deontay Johnson, which actually some teams probably had that. Like, yeah, I would consider maybe benching Tyreek Hill for a guy like a Deontay Johnson. Like that's what we're talking about here. But other than that, not everybody has a team like that. So I think it's going to be difficult to bench a guy like Tyreek. I mean, there's some teams where, like, for example, in a 10 team, I have Rashee Rice with CeeDee Lamb and Malik Neighbors, like all different rounds. That's only like 146. So you look at that and you say, all right, well, if you have options like that, then you're benching Tyreek, of course. But it's difficult to say otherwise on like, how can I bench him? I think when you look at this Miami offense, you say, all right, Devon Achane is a complete lock. I don't know if anybody else is a lock though, Brett. I think that's it.
Yeah, it's fair. I think like this is one of those weeks I'm considering like benching Waddle. Just 'cause I'm unsure of how good he can be. That said, as far as Achan goes, Hill goes, doesn't matter who the quarterback is, like he's right there in my lineup. I think that most teams are not built like that, and so therefore, Tyreek to me becomes a must start each and every week. Achan, same thing, as long as he's healthy and battling some of those injuries we saw last year. But yeah, I think that as far as the rest of the guys go, like Waddle, like it's a murky situation. I don't know that I'm very confident in starting him this week. It's just he hasn't seen the target. 13% target share. You know, it hasn't been great. It just hasn't. And so as far as Tennessee's defense held up pretty well against receivers. And so to me, I think that this might be a week where Waddle ends up on the bench. If not, he's a very desperation flex play, I would say.
Yeah, makes sense. I look at on Tennessee's side, I'll just say Tony Pollard is in a lineup. I think he's really the only one like that I would say a lineup lock for this week, just based on he's the lead guy. Miami's defense as well. The wide receivers are all just flex options for me, though. I wouldn't say that Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins like have to be in your lineup. I think there's better days ahead, I think, under Will Levis, but I don't know if I'm confident enough just yet to start those guys.
Yeah, it's fair. I think that as far as Tennessee's, odds goes, certainly one of those where it's like Pollard and then it's like, meh. Like I wouldn't be confident in the rest of them. Listen, D-Hop looked good last week. He looked finally like this full-time player. I think that continues this week in a game that if the offense in Miami struggles, like this could be one that's done pretty early. Could be a pretty big output. I think that it really goes to Tony Pollard though, and it's not going to go to D-Hop as much. So for me, I'm kind of staying away from it. So for me, Pollard, and that's sort of it.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so our final matchup here with the second game of Monday Night Football is the Seattle Seahawks traveling to Detroit to take on the Lions. Zach, I think that as far as the Lions go, we just continue to say start your guys. I think that Jameson Williams factors into that equation now.
Yeah, he does. I mean, for the Lions, yeah, start everybody. It's pretty simple in terms of the running backs in Montgomery and Gibbs, Jameson Williams, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown. Laporta, you got to keep an eye on the injury from this past week, the ankle problem. Did not practice today, so we'll end up seeing what the case is and if he plays or not. But I'm looking at it right now, and it looks kind of murky. So I don't know 100% that he'll play. He has an extra day also on Monday night. So that definitely helps his case. But I wouldn't see anybody really like behind him if he was ruled out that I'd start instead. Like I think they're going to separate around and move the ball around to a lot of those guys to kind of replace what Laporta brings.
Yeah, and then as far as the other side of the ball goes, like we've seen Kenneth Walker practicing, he was limited today, and so it looks like he's going to come back and be the starter, and that sort of means, the downtick as far as Charbonnet goes. Yeah, I think that if Walker returns, then that's going to mean like Charbonnet's going to get a little bit of a downtick. I also think that they still ride him a little bit to kind of get Walker back into there. So we sort of see a split. That to me is not a good sign for either running back. Like if you have Kenneth Walker, you're probably putting him in your lineup just because he's Kenneth Walker. But I'm not as confident because I think this is a tough matchup. On the road, primetime game, breaking kneecaps, Dan Campbell, and they're going to kind of play that smash mouth football, kind of send the rush. And listen, Aiden Hutchinson's a great player. I think that front is really good, and so as far as the rushing goes, it might be a little bit murkier as far as who to start, depending on if he's starting. That said, if Walker does not start, Charbonnet obviously is a guy that you're going to want to put in. That said, it's a Monday night game, so for me right now, I'm stashing Charbonnet right now on my bench. If news breaks, then there you go, he'll be in the lineup. But if it's Sunday at 1:00 and I haven't heard yet as far as what Kenneth Walker is going to be, I can't feel confident in banking on that Charbonnet might be the guy. And so for me, I'm kind of just benching him this week out of the frustration. It's the 8:15 Monday night game.
Yeah, makes sense. I think everything you said, 100%. In the receiver room, Metcalf and JSN are on my radar right now, Brett. JSN just getting targets, so I don't know how you can really bench him right now. He's putting up good numbers, solid enough numbers, getting those targets in this offense. Looks like he is the second guy now in this Seattle offense, and for that reason, he's got to be in there and against this Detroit secondary that is on the weaker side in the NFL. But in the run game, it's a little tougher. Obviously, the toughest run defense in the NFL, the Detroit Lions are. So not going to be the greatest week for either Walker or Charbonnet. If they do come back in, it's going to be a long day probably for either one of them.
Yeah, and again, if news comes out, let's say tomorrow, that Charbonnet is going to be the guy and Walker's not going or whatever, then I'd reconsider. Even in a tough matchup, I think that building's loud. I think they still feed Charbonnet enough that he gets a pretty good fantasy output. But like I said, in the case that we don't hear, then I don't know that I could feel confident in starting either guy. And yes, you're starting Metcalf, you're starting JSN. Lock-it flex option for me.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so let's go through our lock of the week. These are guys who are outside of the top 20 in consensus rankings that we think you should start. Zach, we are tied 1-1 in the standings last week. You took J.K. Dobbins, who took on Tony Pollard, and you won with 20.1 PPR points to Pollard's 15.2 PPR points. So it's your pick.
Yeah, I'm going with a guy that I talked about earlier, based on injury situation to the guy right next to him, Jalen Warren. I'm picking Najee Harris this week, who practiced in full today, got a rest day on Wednesday. If Warren cannot go, I think this is a monster game for Najee Harris, just based on he'll get the workload. He's also going up against a very weak defense in Indianapolis. So I'm definitely starting Najee Harris no matter what in this stretch in this week. I think when you look at Najee in the matchup, it's just too good to pass up in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and on my side of the ball, I think that, for me, it really comes down to one man, Christian Gonzalez, and that's why I'm taking Jauan Jennings to go out and basically not repeat his performance, because I don't think that we'll ever really see that out of him. But I do think we'll get a pretty good output as far as the points go. So, yeah, for me, it's Jauan Jennings. Again, solid option. You got picked up in 53% of leagues this week. And so he's still out in 23% of leagues. I think that he is a pretty must start in what could be a complete blowout here.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so now ones to watch. These are guys that we think will end up being a waiver target next week. Zach, I finally got the win in the last one. This was one that I dominated last year. And for me, I took Wan'Dale Robinson, who didn't have an amazing output. He looks like he actually just caught a pass about couple seconds ago here in this game. But he finished with 9.8 standard PPR points to your Jacoby Myers with 6.9 standard PPR points. And so I get first pick on this one. I'm taking Allen Lazard. I talked about the Jets at length, and, I think that this is a game where, yes, Surtain might end up being a guy who shadows Garrett. I still think Garrett has a really good game, but I think it allows the second guy, to come up in Aaron Rodgers. Like I talked about, motivation game for Aaron. He talked very, very poorly about the opposing coach after the opposing head coach talked very poorly about his guy, Nathaniel Hackett. And so I think this is a game where the Jets sort of get themselves going. Big game. Salah, I also think, is sort of hyped up for this one. And so, yeah, go to the old reliable Allen Lazard. He's only owned in 32% of Yahoo leagues. And so for me, that's the guy who I'm taking. And, there were a lot of people out there that was doubting Allen Lazard because of the dud that he had last year and the basically $44 million he was making be a healthy scratch. Different guy this year. And obviously the quarterback tells the story. I think that having Aaron Rodgers there has sort of righted his ship. And so I think Lazard actually on a pretty good path here to be the good number 2 guy. Yes, you do worry about Mike Williams starting to get more snaps in the snap share each and every week. But I'm not fading Lazard at all right now. I'm still riding high on him.
Yeah, 100% agree. And for my guy, I'm going with Roschon Johnson, who I didn't talk about earlier because I don't know how much of the workload is going to happen this week. But I am confident that he is edging closer to maybe taking over a guy like DeAndre Swift, who has not looked good so far this season. He's like I said, 1.7 or 1.8 yards per carry so far this season for Swift. And Roschon Johnson came into the game last week and was the leading rusher for Chicago. Now they get a good matchup against Los Angeles, where at home, I think they'll probably control this game. And I think he can get some of those touches in the backfield and just kind of boost his confidence, a guy who hasn't really gotten the opportunity just yet in that backfield in Chicago. I think he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on to become a waiver target next week, just based on, like I said, DeAndre Swift has not looked good at all this season, Brett.
Yeah, it's fair. I think that, we talked about like Bucky Irving and all of that. Like it sort of is the same name of the game here where Roschon, a guy who we talked at length about from the dynasty side of things, like the page is starting to turn a little bit here. And, we thought it was going to be all Swift when they signed him and they threw a lot of money at him, but it's not really working out for him. So, yeah, I agree with your Roschon pick here. It's definitely a guy that should be owned in more than 19% of leagues. And that's sort of it right now. As I watch the Cowboys take a 7-3 lead here on a Rico Dowdle touchdown. Also, so Malik Neighbors make a 39-yard catch on what was a ridiculous ankle breaker, where he just basically found himself wide open by 15 yards. Curious to see how this game ends up. Obviously, hard hitting as the Dallas Cowboys and New York Giants always are. But yeah, also very excited for this week. It's a week I look forward to every single year. It's the week that you and I play each other in Dynasty League. So excited to see how that one turns out.
Bring it on. There you go. It should be a good one.
Certainly a good one, and obviously, like as I just said, Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb going at it, and both of them on my team here tonight. And so, yeah, excited to go to battle with you.
There you go, and I'm excited to go watch it now.
There we go. As the Cowboys just picked off Daniel Jones, and unfortunately, that streak is over now. There's a flag on the play. It might be good. All right, but that'll do it for us here. Podcast, give us a thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is dark before the dawn. We shall rise yet again. Go Malik Neighbors. Go CeeDee Lamb. talk to you on the next one, Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast.